Evet.
Mahaba and good night everybody. Welcome to this session. The topic of this panel section is nature of mathematics, science and technology, similarities and differences. I think this topic is very important for STEM, for the integration of this area. And I am honored to introduce our three distinguished speakers. The first one is Professor Ernest. He's from the University of Assoc in United Kingdom. And the second one is Professor McComas from University of Arkansas in States. And the third one is Associate Professor Gültekin Çakmakcı from the Hydrotech University in Turkey. And in the first 30 minutes, each of them will provide a 10 minutes presentation for us. And the next half hour, we will open for the question and discussion. So now I will pass time to our speaker. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Nice to see you the second day of the conference. We're going to talk about the nature of mathematics, science and technology, the similarities and differences. And I take that to be both about the subjects themselves, mathematics, science, and the subjects bundled under technology, as well as the role of mathematics, science and technology in education. So we're looking at both of those. And let me put up there a provocative relationship. That first of all we have mathematics, secondly a lot of science is applied mathematics, and then thirdly technology is applied science. This is a provocation of course, because, except computer science which is applied mathematics. Well of course historically there is a reversal. First in history technology was developed, and then out of that came mathematics and science. So there's something questionable about prioritizations, I suppose. Uncontroversially, applied mathematics and sciences, especially physics, do overlap quite a lot. So I want to give you some of my thoughts about similarities between these subjects, mostly between mathematics and science, because as technology is quite diverse and it's quite hard to characterize it in some ways. Maybe I will know more about that by the end of this morning. First of all, since we're talking about the nature of mathematics, the nature of science, the nature of technology, one similarity is that there are very interesting and vibrant areas of study, the philosophy of mathematics and the philosophy of science, and furthermore, these are both important for the subjects themselves and for education. A focus on the nature of mathematics, although admittedly in mathematics, this is not recognized as so important in education. The nature of science, as I'm sure we'll hear a bit later, that is more recognized as important for the teaching of science. I think they're both important. There's also an emergent philosophy of technology, which I can't say so much about, but there are certainly books of that title, and a number of people have written interesting things about that. And some of the similarities, both science and mathematics use rigorous reasoning. They use equations and modeling. In terms of, for validation of science and mathematics, single counterexamples will falsify both science and mathematical generalizations. That's a common feature. And furthermore, in validation, any finite number of examples or observations cannot validate a generalization either in science or in mathematics. That we have a rich and varied history of mathematics, history of science, both of which are significant for education, it seems to me. And we have both ethno-mathematics and ethno-science, that is, proto or pre-mathematical ideas embedded in culture, just as you have pre or proto-scientific ideas embedded in culture. And of course, the same would be, I've not heard the term ethno-technology, maybe they just call it technology, but a similar area would exist, does exist, historically and in the present. In education, in all STEM subjects, we have the problem-solving cycle and investigations where, and certainly this is big in technology, but also in science and mathematics education, where you have a formulation of a problem, you have an understanding or an attempt to understand, you have some kind of design process or planning how to approach it, you have then an implementation of that process, and then an evaluation of that. And that works in all three subjects, that design or problem-solving cycle. Another similarity is that practical work is significant in all STEM subjects. I'll say a bit more about that when I come to differences, but certainly practical work plays, has a significant place in mathematics, but it's central in science and technology, of course. All of these subjects are concerned with the role of their subject in society. You have critical education in science, mathematics, and technology education, concerned with the social costs, social benefits, social outcomes of implementing those subjects. And education is concerned with those dimensions. In all of these subjects, there's a recognition, especially in science and mathematics, that teacher knowledge matters. That's a big new growth area in education, looking at teacher knowledge, pedagogical knowledge of subject, in science and mathematics, and presumably in technology. There are problems and issues of attitudes in all of these subjects that, because they're quite difficult sequential subjects, or certainly mathematics and science, that can be seen as a source of attitude and problems and issues. They're regarded as difficult. Certainly mathematics and physics and chemistry are regarded as very difficult subjects. Whether or not that's true, or whether as I said, there's these hierarchies of concepts to be mastered, but whether some of that difficulty is an artifact of how we teach it is still an open issue. And there are gender issues in all of these subjects. They're seen as masculine, certainly in Western countries, mathematics and physics particularly, of course biology is not seen as masculine in the same way, are seen as masculine, and these lead to problems and issues in schooling. Moving on to differences, it seems to me, in my relative ignorance, that technology is a less theoretical subject than mathematics and science. But as soon as I say that, then I think of computer science and biotechnology, which are pretty theoretical subjects, so I can falsify that. But maybe what they do as technology in school is less theoretical. Another difference is mathematics is viewed as certain. This is part of the philosophy of mathematics, views of the nature of mathematics. Mathematics is viewed as certain truth, and science has always been seen as conjectural and falsifiable. Although there is some developments in the philosophy of mathematics looking at social constructivist views of mathematics and saying that no knowledge is certain beyond human knowing. It's not absolute or eternal in some naive way. Another difference is that science refers to the physical world. Mathematics is about a theoretical world of mathematical objects. And that's a significant difference. It means that there is a bedrock in science which you can test against, whereas in mathematics you can actually spin stories out of any set of axioms if they're consistent. And there's even work on the paraconsistent and inconsistent bits of mathematics that's become a new frontier for logic. Mathematical induction proves, induction in science does not. Of course, that's a little bit of a wordplay, because mathematical induction is not the same as induction in science, and indeed, induction about generalizing from a finite number of instances is a useful heuristic just for conjecturing relationships in mathematics, just as it is in science. But mathematics also has mathematical induction, which is a specific form of proof tied in with the natural numbers. The social context is acknowledged as part of science, but it still remains controversial in mathematics, which is seen as value and context-free. So that's the difference. I mean, I'm fighting to try and say that we need to open our eyes a bit more in mathematics too. But that's a difference that you'll find among mathematicians and scientists. And mathematicians often regard their work, because it doesn't refer to the physical world, as being disconnected. Practical is routine and necessary in science and technology, practical work in education and indeed in the subject itself. But it's not routine or seen as necessary in mathematics if you go beyond geometrical instruments. The idea of exploring situations, quite a lot of mathematics teaching is done without practical work. I think that's a shame, but that is a difference. Now, this is an interesting one. I'm still not sure about it myself. Science has an extensive substantive content, whereas mathematics is a language and a set of skills. So there seems to be, but then of course once we reach higher mathematics, that language, the concepts that come out of it, the nested and hierarchy of concepts come out, becomes pretty substantive as well. But certainly in school mathematics, it's not so much about something. And science is always applied, it's always about the world. Although if you look at cosmology, Big Bang, etc., it's a pretty far-reaching, stretched out imaginary part of the world. But nonetheless, it's still about the universe we live in, whereas mathematics is studied for its own sake. So I think we should recognize and celebrate both similarities and differences between these subjects. There's quite a lot in common, and I'm sure there are more commonalities than but we also need to recognize there are differences as well. Thank you, that's my contribution.
Hi. Now I'm going to talk about the differences between science and technology, mainly. Before that, let me introduce myself. Actually, I used to be an engineer, chemical engineer. I worked in the industry for a year. I got bored, and I changed my job. I got my master's and PhD in science education, and I'm working in science education since 2006. So now we can start actually what I mean by nature of science. You heard nature of mathematics, you heard nature of engineering, but there's another strange word is called nature of STEM. Let's see whether it's strange or not. So what is there any problem with the mic? Mikrofonun bir sıkıntı var mı?
Ses geliyor ama.
Maybe they're gonna sort it out. When we look at the policy reports, actually policy report triggers changes, okay? We had some policies like beyond 2000, it was an influential report in the UK. Europe needs more scientists, it was an influential report from European Commission. And another one, science education now, was also an EU policy report. When we look at the United States, actually, nowadays they are talking about STEM education. This is an article from Forbes, actually. It says, America desperately needs more STEM students. It says, there is no doubt that to advance our economy and our society, we need to create the next generation technology innovation, not just consume them. So here is a video I'm gonna show you.
The students, teachers, businesses, and nonprofit organizations taking big new steps to support computer science in America's schools. Learning these skills isn't just important for your future, it's important for our country's future. If we want America to stay on the cutting edge, we need young Americans like you to master the tools and technology that will change the way we do just about everything. That's why I'm asking you to get involved. Don't just buy a new video game, make one. Don't just download the latest app, help design it. Don't just play it on your phone, programming. No one's born a computer scientist, but with a little hard work and some math and science, just about anyone can become one. This week is your chance to give it a shot. And don't let anyone tell you you can't. Whether you're a young man or a young woman, whether you live in a city or a rural area, computers are going to be a big part of your future. And if you're willing to work and study hard, that future is yours to shape. Thanks, everybody.
So this goes, that kind of discussion starts the initiative. It's called Next Generation Science Standard. It was, I think, implemented in 2000.
About 1 year now.
One year ago it was implemented. It has been implemented. So when we look at the Next Generation Science Standard, it focuses on the science and engineering practices actually. Okay, this is the main differences. What are the aim of science and engineering practices? It's trying to use STEM education. It's trying to use an integrated approach for STEM education. The reason why STEM education, as you just heard from President Obama, it says we need more scientists, we need more inventors and innovators. So if we got some STEM graduate, they're going to make innovation and they will be more entrepreneurs and we will get more money or welfare. So the question is whether it's practical. Is an integrated STEM education actually? Yesterday when we were talking with Bill, he said it's a kind of wish, but in practice it may not work. He's going to talk about this actually. I'm not going to go in detail. Actually, what we are hearing in Europe or in the States or other countries, we need more inventors. Okay, these are some examples, some best examples actually. If we use STEM education, we will produce more inventors or innovators or, can you see those? So it's Nike, Hike, Adidas, Pumais, Fuma, something like that. So the previous slide was best good example actually. When we look at the Turkish context actually, Turkish curricula have been changed last year, it has been revised. And when we look at the detail, there's a course called entrepreneurship, for example. There's a course called design and technology. There's a course called science. The main idea is that STEM education, we need more inventors, more than the same. So what happened in Europe, in United States, we try to copy it, like Puma and Puma. So do we really need it or not? So America needs more scientists and engineers. Okay, I would like to ask you, how many of you are engineers? Well, what about mathematicians? So what about scientists? How many of you are scientists? I realize mathematicians haven't called them as scientists. Is it true? Yes. Interesting. So who are scientists, who are inventors, who are engineers, and who are mathematicians? And what do they do? Here are some examples, for example. A medical doctor is a scientist. What do they do? They help patients to recover sooner or later. So yesterday, Professor Paul gave an example. George Cantor is known as the inventor of set theory in mathematics. Or Johannes Kepler, is he a mathematician or physicist or scientist? What he has done, as we know, he invented some Kepler's, or discovered, let's say, some Kepler's laws. What about the engineers? What do they do? Like chemical engineering, petroleum engineers, what do they? Extracting or refining fossil fuels. It's a kind of mechanic. The reason why I quit the engineering, because it became boring. Every day I started the same things. So, but at school they didn't tell me that part. Maybe I didn't attend that class. I don't know. So it was boring. Yeah. So what science asks actually, Professor Paul discussed. That's why I'm going to go quickly on these slides. This is next generation science standards terms. It says, the practice of science is to ask and refine questions that lead to description and explanation of how the natural and design world works, and which can be sometimes empirically or sometimes not tested. The scientific question can be ontological question or epistemic question, like these are some examples. What's the material world like? How can we explain it? How do we know what we know? This sort of question is related to science. What about the engineering or technological questions? It's engineers trying to produce optimal solution to human needs. Engineering question or technological question can be, how can we make a better rover Mars car, let's say? How can we improve the quality of our standards? Here are some description, some similarities and differences between science and technology or engineering actually. What's the purpose of science? When you look at the science, it says it produces explanation of the material world. Professor Paul said it's as a physical world, isn't it? In science, we are dealing with physical world. But in math, it's quite different. What about technology? Technology generate optimal solution to human needs. What about the methodology? What kind of methodology do we use in maths, in science, or in technology? In science, there is no single methods. There can be lots of methods we can use. But in technology, or in engineering, we usually use engineering model. What's called engineering model, actually. There are some different models, engineering models. What about the inquiry? What kind of question we are investigating in science? This is also quite different. What about the outcomes? What kind of outcomes do we have in science or engineering? Outcomes can be discovery or invention of theories or laws. But in technology, it's something that we actually touch, don't we? It's a kind of artifact, usually it's like that. So these are the main differences, actually. When we look at, for example, it's maybe chemist, I'm giving an example, actually. What we do, actually, we use maths in science or in technology. For example, in a chemical reaction, how chemical reaction happens. We can explain this based on, let's say, collision theory. It's a submicroscopic word. We use some particle modeling. Or we can use mathematical modeling. We can say, okay, based on the Rate's law, this is the equation for this reaction. And yesterday, one of our plenary sessions was about the PISA report, actually, isn't it? So I would like to focus on this as well. Just one slide. We shouldn't overestimate those tasks, actually. Okay, this task is related to innovation. This task is related to STEM education, actually. Why? Because OECD is doing this. Why? What's the purpose of OECD? Let's look at their mission. I took from their webpage. It says, the mission of OECD is to promote policies that will improve the economical and social well-being of people around the world. PISA tests are designed to assess to what extent students at the end of compulsory education can apply their knowledge to real-life situation and be equipped for full participation in society. And OECD is interested with some indexes like Global Innovation Index. When we look at the Global Innovation Index, there is a relationship actually between this index and PISA results actually. So that's why I'm saying, just looking at the PISA results, like, what we should look at what's the purpose, who is doing, why they are doing, why they are comparing actually. Now I'm going to move on here actually. These are some questions we can discuss. The questions would be, do we really need more scientists? Like what those questions come to relates actually. In Turkey, do we really need scientists? 90% of the engineers are unemployed. Why do we need more engineers? What are the criteria of a discipline actually? Yesterday, Professor Paul and Bill were discussing about the mathematics. Professor Paul said mathematics is a unique discipline. What about STEM? Is it a unique discipline? What are the criteria to be a discipline? Can we call it discipline? So, or is it a discipline or is it a political issue? So politicians are using in their campaign. Do we need an integrated STEM education? Bill is going to talk about this. Philosophical coherence of the nature of STEM should be investigated. And there might be some practices, but I would question Mark actually, just the previous keynote. Professor Lin Shun gave us some examples, like Mountaineers Education Trade Labs, Children's Innovation Projects, Garden-based learning. Are those the good examples for STEM education? So these are the things that we are going to discuss during our discussion. Thanks.
It's always good when the technology works. There you go. Well, I am in a wonderful position because my two fine colleagues have, I think, done a great job setting up what I wanted to talk about, which is a bit divergent from our charge here. I think they have done an excellent job covering what the panel discussion was really all about. What are some of the similarities and differences between some of the central elements of STEM education. So I thought what I might do is to talk a little bit about STEM education itself. As you would certainly be aware, a trend that's been going on now, especially in the United States, is what is sort of being called STEM education. And frankly, for the last 3 years, I've been trying to figure out what that is. What is STEM education? And I have learned the most important lesson is that when you engage in a conversation about STEM education, you first have to take a few moments to get on the same page, to understand what the other person means by STEM education. What do you mean by STEM education? What I am coming to understand is that when a lot of people talk about STEM education, they're talking about integrated STEM education. So I'm just going to call that ICEMST for short. And we'll discuss that a little bit here this morning. This is a fairly potent trend. It seems that many people believe that this is the solution to our STEM education problems. But frankly, I wonder, as my colleagues do, whether there is a problem. I mean, do we have enough scientists? Do we have enough engineers? That's a rhetorical question, I suppose. It's also an empirical one. We can get some sort of answer to it. But I'd also like to know the answer to the question, what's the purpose of school? That's a massive question to ask. I'm not going to begin to answer it. But one answer to that question must certainly be that a purpose of school is to get somebody ready for their life, to get them ready to take their place in society. So even as a science educator, when somebody asks the question, do we have enough scientists? Do we have enough engineers? I ask, do we have enough artists? Do we have enough playwrights? Do we have enough engineers who can read literature? Do we have enough scientists who can write? I mean, this sort of, the integration that seems so positive to me really is not a kind of integration around S, T, E, and M. It's really an integration that would prepare people for citizenship. And I suppose we'll continue to debate the purpose of school until time ends. But for me, one of the great purposes of school is socialization and a kind of very broad integration that makes one ready to take their place in society, wherever that may be. I'm very happy to have our president make a plea for more interest in computer science. That sounds fine. It would be lovely if there were other advocates for, writing better plays, producing better television dramas. On and on and on. I think it's a bit short-sighted just because there is a perception, real or imagined, of some sort of crisis at some element in the workforce that we turn our schools into vocational academies. There's also a subtext message here that I think is almost unavoidable. If you're not going into a STEM field, one, you're probably going to be unemployed, and two, you're not very valuable to society. And those things are most certainly not true. Nobody's said those things directly, of course. I'm being a little bit dramatic. But when all of the emphasis about school service, school study, is on this issue of preparing for a particular small suite of vocations, I do worry what kind of message gets through. So, one of the current trends in education is integrated STEM ed. We mix up the technology, the science, the engineering, and the math. And by the way, even though I study this stuff, I'm still trying to figure out what the difference between technology and engineering is. I mean, in a way, it just formed a nice word. We have the word STEM because it has the right 4 letters in it. So I tend to think of technology and engineering as much the same. They certainly have much more in common with each other. And as Paul did for us a wonderful job comparing and contrasting science and mathematics, which seem highly related on the other side. My fear, I guess, because I've been in this job now for quite a long time, is that this is another pendulum swing for us. That now the pendulum of education has gotten jerked over to the STEM side, and if you're not doing STEM education, and if you're not doing integrated STEM education, then you're not with it. And I'd love to tell you that I can predict in 10 years we won't be having this conversation. I was part of the STS craze as a graduate student. That was a major new element of school alignment. Who talks about STS education now? I mean, even when I was actively involved in that now 20 years ago, I wondered how long it would last, and it petered out after about a decade. I don't think STEM education is going away. I do think that integrated STEM education may not be the panacea that we think it is. The other issue associated with ICEMST is how do you teach in an integrated fashion? Well, people have figured out the answer to that question too. It's problem-based instruction or project-based instruction. The difference between those two eludes me on occasion as well, by the way. We like to throw acronyms around. So the only way to teach in the elementary grades now is ICEMST, and the only way to orient that teaching is with project-based instruction. It would be nice if all of our problems could be solved with just a couple of acronyms. Schools and kids are much more complicated than that. I'm not going to say that these are bad approaches. I am certainly going to suggest that they will not solve our problems. So what I'd like to do for the next couple of minutes is sort of bounce back and forth between the threat and promise of STEM education. I had a lot more to say about the threat of STEM education, but I'll start with a couple of things that seem promising. It may well be that integrated STEM education gives students an opportunity to see how these 4 disciplines relate to each other. The relatedness can increase, I think, relevance on the part of students. Why are we studying this is a question that kids often ask, and perhaps with an integrated plan and a fine project or problem that orients instruction, kids can see how these 4 elements work together. It is inherently stimulating, I think, to be doing some sort of exciting project or solving some problem, but I do caution us, where does that problem, where does that project come from? If it comes from the teacher, we may not be a whole lot better off than we were, some years ago. And if it comes from the students, how do we know that they're going to be learning the content that we want them to learn? This is an age-old problem in teaching. It's not going to be solved with problem-based instruction. It is possible, but frankly I think not terribly likely, that students will be able still to appreciate the distinct nature of the 4 disciplines that we're now advocating be put together. And that is my central worry, my central thesis. I think Paul did a really great job bouncing back and forth between, well, here's what science and math have in common, here's what they don't have in common. I want kids to learn that. It's vital that students understand that mathematics is a discrete discipline. It has a history, it has rules, it has a future. I can say the same about science, I can say the same about technology and engineering. If you mush the 4 together, is it likely that students will be able to see the uniqueness that the discipline of mathematics, that the discipline of science, that the discipline of technology and engineering brings to humanity? That's a worry. So I have one frame for the promise of STEM education. I have several that talk about the threat. I think the projects and problems that are created that guide instruction in an ICEMST environment are probably going to seem very contrived to students, just a fancy word for made up. They're probably going to be coming from the teacher. We're going to find good projects, and teachers are going to want to use them every year. Actually, I watched this happen 20-some years ago with STS education. You know, the projects were always supposed to well up from the bottom. They were always supposed to come from the environment in which the children live. But what happened was teachers would find a really cool problem, and then they would replay it every year because it worked. There's nothing wrong with that, but from a theoretical perspective, it's obviously then a top-down approach rather than the bottom-up approach that most of us would recommend. There is vanishingly small evidence that traditional math science content can be effectively learned through ICEMST. When you put the two together, where does the math begin, where does the science end? Hard to say. I'm very fearful that ICEMST can become a new instructional formula. I said as much a moment ago. Is this the panacea? Is this the answer to all of our problems? We just roll out a problem-based approach or a project-based approach, and all is good in the elementary schools, the primary schools. By the way, I will say that in most instances, ICEMST is being advocated for the lower grades. Current teachers are going to need a massive amount of training to be able to teach using an ICEMST project-based model. A huge amount of training. The most frightening thing about the next generation science standards in the United States is that we would almost have to stop school for 2 or 3 years. Just freeze it in place to make all the necessary changes in current teachers and in the teacher pipeline, the pre-service population, in order to get everyone ready to go with this very complex new model. There's a lot to like about the next generation science standards, but frankly, I think they'll be impossible to put into play in the way in which they're currently conceptualized. So, as I've said several times, we have said as well, the 4 parts of STEM have different rules, traditions, goals, histories, and aren't those things important for students to understand? I think students in an ICEMST environment are going to fail to understand the unique roles and contributions of each of the 4 elements of STEM. Paul started to go down this road, and I was very appreciative. I'll just give one example here. I mean, look at the nature of truth or proof in 3 disciplines. In science, I heard Paul say this, in science, it's impossible. You can never know that you have discovered, quote, the truth. In math, it's self-referential, it's guided by axioms and principles, it sort of wells up from the bottom, and you base your future arguments upon known things that are defined in advance. And in engineering and technology, what's the nature of truth? The bridge doesn't fall down. And I'm happy. When I drive across a bridge, I want it not to fall down. And I appreciate that technologists and engineers have over-engineered the structure so that it remains up, hopefully for a good long time. So look at even one small element here, one small philosophical element, the nature of truth. It's impossible, it's self-referenced, and it's what works. 3 very different ways of looking at truth in 3 disciplines that we now want to put together. So in our new standards, we somehow have the engineering principles that have been, I call them, imposed on science instruction. I also like to point out that U.S. teachers have not been given 1 more minute of class time, and now we have to teach science and engineering. What happened there? I think when people were voting on the next generation science standards, they sort of forgot about this. Oh, we need to do 20% more in exactly the same amount of time. So students are referred to a list of science and engineering practices, but this list just confuses the practices in science and engineering. I would have been somewhat happy if we had 2 lists, science practices and engineering practices, but no, they've been conflated together, and I think this further complicates things. I'll just show you the list here. I certainly won't. This is all available online, and in a sense, I almost apologize for talking about a U.S. document, but I fully understand that, as my colleague said here, oftentimes what happens in the U.S. very quickly becomes a point of conversation around the world. I'm not saying that these new U.S. standards are good or necessarily bad, but I recognize that we will be talking about them internationally. I think ICEMST can actually exceed, in some cases, the intellectual level of the particularly younger primary students. It's like a circus in a way, all these things going on at the same time. As I've said several times, teacher training and teacher retraining and curriculum development are going to be extremely difficult. In the secondary school, ICEMST really doesn't make much sense at all because the teachers are just not going to accept it. You know, especially in the US context, we have biology teachers who can't teach chemistry and they can't teach physics and they don't want to. And any sort of a class that would really blend the three big sciences together, I think is going to be very difficult. The projects, I think, again, by students will seem very contrived. As I mentioned, the secondary teachers, most of whom have a major in a particular subject like math or physics or biology or chemistry, are just not going to be comfortable with this plan. So I'll end with a slightly modest proposal. I think that the individual STEM disciplines need to have their own identity. That's hardly a surprise. I've been saying this for the last 10 minutes. Occasional projects in primary schools might help to link the 4 parts of STEM. And maybe in the secondary environment, we could have a half-year class that we would call a capstone experience after folks have had chemistry and physics and biology. Then there could be some project where a skilled teacher helps the students put these various elements together. I think teaching them together is probably not a good idea. Having the students do a project or solve some kind of a strategic problem after they've amassed some of the content knowledge, the traditional content knowledge, is a much more doable idea. And I thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you for the 3 speakers. And I think we have 15 minutes left open for question and discussion. If you like, you can ask the question in Turkish. I think Professor Çakmakcı can translate for us.
Can I ask questions? Is there a microphone? Can you hear me? First, thank you. First, thank you of all of us. I want to ask some basic questions to you, but not one question. There are more questions in my mind. First, I want to ask you, we know in nature of science, in natural sciences, theories can change or they can develop. They are not real facts. They are only paradigms. But I wonder, in nature of mathematics, I see in books there are a lot of theories, theory, evidence, but I wonder, are they real? Can a mathematical theory can change? What do you think about this?
Well, there's a paradox in mathematics that some things seem to persist, but I believe things do change quite a lot. Yes, it's true that we have the Pythagorean theorem that was proved before the time of Euclid, about, first proved, I don't know, was it 500 BC or BCE, 2,500 years ago, and we still could teach it in school, and indeed there are 300 proofs of it or something. But in some ways, some things do stay, but some things change as well. Old theories, flaws are found, new ways of proving things, new rules of what's an acceptable proof emerge. So although there is some kind of conservation, there's also change as well, and it can be quite deep-seated. There was a time when Euclidean geometry was thought to be the science of geometry of the world, and then someone managed to discover non-Euclidean geometries, which actually fit better through Einstein. So the status of theories and the range of theories changes. So it's a paradox. You've got some things that persist and some things that change. And the same, of course, is true in physical sciences too, and all sciences, I suppose. That although Newton's theories were overthrown, if you like, by Einstein, there's a kernel that's conserved as an approximation in certain things. But now I'm straying into science, and I should not
stray away. You're doing fine.
Anyway, in science, theories can change, but in maths also, or let me give you an example in chemistry, we shouldn't forget theories or laws based on some assumptions, okay? So like chemistry, when you look at the thermodynamic laws, it says some of them is based, assumption is it works for binary gases, but in practice it's quite different. In mathematics it's quite different, isn't it? So, yeah.
Can I ask a second question?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask dear McComas. First, I want to ask you.
Yeah, please go on. Yeah, please go on.
I want to ask you, when you say science, what do you mean? Only natural sciences? For instance, history is a science. Okay, they are science. Anthropology is a science.
Maybe.
So, I want to ask you, I think all science areas can change. For instance, twins, their genetic codes are same, but their characteristics, their psychological positions are not same. What do you think about family resemblance, future of science? What do you think about this?
Well, you've asked several questions at once, and that's very economical. So I'll choose to answer some of them. Let me first say that your first question, I think, reinforces my view about the challenges of STEM education. That if in fact we didn't have expertise in mathematics and science and engineering and technology, then these disciplines just lose their character, and I think they would lose their impact. Your second question, the one you directed at me, is an excellent one. I do tend to talk about science as if everyone understands exactly what I mean by it. I'm really only referring to natural science. And when I say that anthropology is maybe a science, we certainly have zones that would, I suppose, radiate out from a science like physics or chemistry, and then you might have biology and psychology and anthropology. And honestly, there is a point away from that center where the laws that would be discovered or created, depending upon your preference, would hold less and less frequently. And without launching into an entire lecture on the nature of science, since I get to do that after lunch, I would simply say that for some, when you've moved too far from that center, that kernel, maybe physics, it's no longer a natural science, it's now a social science. And even calling history a science for me would be somewhat problematic in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
There is another question.
I believe I have some questions which I let the young lady go first. First of all, let me just introduce myself a little bit so that you can understand the basis for which my argument is made. I am a professor of chemical engineering, but I'm also appointed in the mathematics department because I also have training in mathematics. So I'm disappointed that I hear technology and engineering being combined as a discipline. That's not the case. They exist separately. Engineering uses technology and technology uses engineering. But they're different disciplines. That's the first thing. Now, the other mistake that I understand I'm hearing here is that the ICEMST is a combination of the STEM. That is a mistake again. S is for the science, T is for technology, E is for engineering, and the M is for the math. What is intended here is a collaboration, not a mixture. In other words, each discipline work together to finish the project. Now, going back a little bit, I don't believe that it is true. As a matter of fact, I know of evidence, hard evidence, currently, in the U.S., where schools have combined these topic areas or these disciplines to produce very bright, young students that go on to medical school. And this develop devices for addressing current diseases in the United States. But one of the more fundamental questions that I'm surprised that we're not talking about is the production from the engineer, or from the engineers. Thomas Edison is well known for his inventions. There is one other person that is currently alive and is practicing in the MIT under the name of Robert Langer. He is the second most patented fellow in the history of patents. He is multidisciplinary. So he combines all of these discussions in the sense of the topic area STEM, okay? And he has demonstrated that this is possible for someone, not a lot of people can do this, but someone can actually do this. But the notion of exposing high school students to all of these, and engineering is not necessarily one of the things that we would expect from high school students, but the understanding that the engineers need the science. They need the science, and they need the math. As a matter of fact, there is no real engineer who will not have had some training in math. So we're not excluding them. It is required. It is prerequisite. And if technology and engineering were the same, then you would not have a discipline called civil engineering, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, chemical engineering. You would just have one engineer. So they are very different disciplines. And if you want to start that in a philosophical way, you have to go back to the sciences, in fact, because that's where all of these are combined. So, I am disappointed that we're making this argument that the needs for STEM is not necessarily real. The argument to be made is if you look at the economics, look at the demand. If we claim we're preparing students for their place in society, then we look at the demand of society. Society demands more engineering right now than it demands architects or artists. And so, yes, that will be the reality. And that's what I want to say.
Well, let me just thank you for your comment. A number of them were directed at me, and that's fine. I'm not sure there was a question there, but that's fine too. And frankly, I don't pretend to have deep personal and professional engagement with the distinction at the boundary between science and engineering. And I'd be delighted to chat with you more about how these are truly distinct. Frankly, what I was trying to say is that science and mathematics seem to fit together more closely, and engineering and technology seem to fit together more closely, sort of as pods. I do respect that there's a distinction between the two, and I'm happy to chat about that.
So let me help with this. Later on today, I will talk about the applications of mathematics in the solution of transdisciplinary problems. Transport phenomena, which includes chemical reaction, fluid flow, mass transfer. And it is based, the tool is the mathematics.
Thank you for your comment actually. So we are talking the same language as you are chemical engineer. So the thing is, I think for my part, we are not talking different things, but we are talking actually. In practice, it's quite challenging to put those areas in primary, elementary, or secondary school. So it's a good idea, it's sensible, it seems sensible, but in practice, if we are going to put in practice, we should think about the challenges like teacher education, like the time in the classroom teaching, these sort of things. Other thing is that before putting those into practice, I'm not talking about the United States case. it seems you don't have many unemployment rate in engineers. But in Turkey, the engineers are unemployed rather than producing a lot of engineers. What about improving the quality of engineers who can innovate, who can be entrepreneurs when they graduate? In that case, it's a good idea to put those ideas, including like innovation and entrepreneurship approach in STEM education in university, like in technical engineering, so that those people, those engineers, can develop or create their own job after graduation. Thank you.
Yes, some interesting issues have been raised about how to combine these different subjects, the different central subjects we're talking about. And I've heard two people saying in a way that a fully functioning person that comes out of the education system or an adult in society should be able to bring these things together and indeed, as you were saying earlier, not only STEM subjects but become a fully rounded person with literature, with so many things. If we look at the multiple theory of intelligence, we have all these dimensions that people are stronger in some and in others. And I like that idea, and I think creativity will come out of people who have different disciplines, can combine them, as we've heard in engineering, as in the man with all the patents. But for me, that's a separate issue from, do we combine all these subjects together and teaching them in school? And already there are issues about going from single subject sciences to general science. I know that in England, people are concerned that if you train teachers to be science teachers, rather than having a specialism in physics, chemistry, biology, then some of the edge is lost, that people are not so fully into that discipline, even though later on maybe they can teach all of those subjects with the specialism. Likewise, even within mathematics, there's an argument that if you teach mathematical ideas integrated into applications all the time, then students will not abstract the key concepts and develop a deeper theoretical, pure understanding of mathematics, which will later on facilitate even better applications. So if you make everything too applied all the time, then sometimes you don't see the deep abstract, make the connections within the subject. So I think there's an important argument for maintaining the integrity of separate disciplines, so that people studying them can understand the nature of those disciplines, but hopefully that having mastered several of these disciplines, they can then integrate and use them. But I think if we start doing that right from the outset, I think we'll lose something. That's my view.
And Paul, that's very well said. The solution to this challenge and the opportunity that we have, I think, really revolves around making sure that students are grounded in the discipline, understand the strengths of each and the special character of each. What we don't do in schools is provide that sort of capstone, whether it's at a semester or a year or something like that. And it could even combine things like, somebody just said entrepreneurship, maybe. And I thought, well, that would be really clever. That, maybe as the senior thesis upon graduation, or when the students are getting ready to graduate from high school, that might be the opportunity to have these things come together. So at no point, in no way, am I suggesting that we want to build strong walls between these disciplines such that students are absolutely not given an opportunity to see the interrelationships, but they have to understand the fundamentals first. There's a wonderful quote from Joseph Campbell, and roughly stated, it says, you have to understand the rules before you can break them.
Okay.
Ben karşılıklı bir üniversitesinden Türkçe sormak istiyorum. Yani bir konu hakkında. Liselerde şu anda Türkiye'de liselerde parti projesi kapsamında öğrencilere tablet bilgisayar dağıtımı oldu ve sınıflarda da interaktif board dediğimiz etkileşim tahtalar dağıtıldı. Ama böyle şikayetler de var. Öğretmenlerin bu ICEMST bilgisayar destek eğitime yakın olmadıkları ya da o konuda tam becerili bilgi sahibi olmadıklarından dolayı. Yani biraz biz hazırlıksız girdik o projeye ve dağıtıldı en son düşük yakında bir talepler dağıtıldı. Ama hani duyuyorum işte hem öğretmenlerin böyle programları var, hem de öğrenciler yani şu anda hani oyun amaçlı kullanıyorlar. İşte Google'da indirip bu şekilde oynanmış. Sizden yani iki konuda yani konu bilgilenmek istiyorum. Yani bu böyle bir projelerde yani işte parti projesi, şimdi yani tam kısa adını tam hatırlayamadım ama yani fırsatlar ve işte alternatif teknolojiler, evet, teknolojiyle iletişim hareketi diye geçiyor. Yani başka bir uygulamaları var mı ve yani biz hani bize ne önerirsiniz? Yani sistem eğitim açısından da olabilir düşünebilirsiniz. Hani ne yapalım yani? Böyle bir şey oldu hani ama hani ben böyle çok
teşekkür ederim. Let me translate the question actually. It's going to be short. Lost in translation. So, in Turkey,